Today at 6, the 2-year-old boy who died after living in a flat in Greater Manchester covered in mould. A coroner rules that the death of Awab Ishaq was directly connected to the conditions inside the family's flat in Rochdale. Their solicitor said the landlord did nothing about it.
We were anxious and fearful of what the mould was doing to Awab. Whenever friends would come to visit, they would tell us that the conditions that Rochdale Borough-wide Housing were keeping us in were not right.
Downing Street says the circumstances which led to his death were unacceptable. Also on the programme tonight. Russia launches one of its biggest barrages of missiles at cities across Ukraine. Half of the capital, Kyiv, now has no power. Wages rise at their fastest rate for more than 20 years, but the soaring cost of living means most people's pay actually fell. England fly into Qatar ahead of the World Cup that kicks off on Sunday. Wales also arrive later tonight. And the dog who handed herself in to the local police after running away from her owner because of fireworks.
And on BBC London at 6:30, protecting families living around the Thames. 8 years on from these devastating floods, a new project gets underway.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. A 2-year-old boy died in Greater Manchester because of prolonged exposure to mould in the rented flat where his family were living. Awab Ishaq died from severe respiratory conditions after his second birthday in December 2020. The inquest into his death was told his father had repeatedly called the landlord, Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, to report the problem, but it had not been fixed. The coroner said his death should be a defining moment for the housing sector. Our North of England correspondent Fiona Trott is in Rochdale.
Well, during this inquest, it felt like no matter what action Awab's parents took, no matter what action health professionals took, nothing could have prevented this toddler's death. Today, the coroner said, how in the UK in 2020 can a 2-year-old die from exposure to mould at home? His family say the housing association was racist. His death has become a political issue. But whatever happens next, it doesn't change the fact that a father and a mother are still grieving for their 2-year-old son.
A little boy who was suffocating in his own home. 2-year-old Awab Ishaq had fungus in his blood and lungs. It came from this. These were his family's living conditions. Where they washed, where they ate, they were surrounded by mould. Today, his mother wept as a statement was read out on the family's behalf.
We have no doubt at all that we were treated this way because we are not from the country. Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, we have a message for you. Stop discriminating, stop being racist, stop housing people in homes you know are unfit for human habitation.
In a statement, the chief executive of RBH said, I'm truly devastated about Awab's death and the things we got wrong. We didn't recognise the level of risk to a little boy's health from the mould in the family's home. We allowed a legal disrepair process widely used in the housing sector to get in the way of promptly tackling the mould. As a community-owned organisation, we support the diverse communities of Rochdale. We're proud of the work we do with all our tenants. But inside the flat, mould still existed right up until the day Awab died. Here's why. In 2017, Faisal Abdullah told Rochdale Borough-wide Housing about the mould. He was told to paint over it, but it was a recurring problem. In June 2020, Mr Abdullah started a claim against RBH, but their policy meant work could not start until his solicitors agreed to it. In July, a health visitor wrote to RBH detailing her concerns about the mould and its potential impact on Awab's health. But IT systems at RBH meant not everyone had access to this information. In September, a community midwife completed a special circumstances form highlighting her concerns. There was no evidence to show it was received by Children's Services. It was not shared with the family's GP. On the 20th of December 2020, the day before he died, Awab was discharged from Royal Oldham Hospital. His mother was told to bring him back if he became unwell again. But because English was not her first language, the doctor used Google Translate. They did not specify which hospital she should go to. On the 21st of December, Awab was rushed back to the Royal Oldham Hospital. He died from a heart attack.
It's already the case that this tragedy has shone a light on what needs to change in social housing. We're bringing forward legislation. That legislation will make sure that the housing associations who are responsible for social housing are held to account.
Awab Ishak died a week after his second birthday. Today there's hope that this tragedy will be a defining moment for the housing sector and future deaths will be prevented. Fiona Trott, BBC News, Rochdale.
The government is committed to halving the number of homes in England that aren't considered decent by 2030. But for decades, people have been complaining that far too many, millions in fact, are living in substandard or dangerous accommodation. Our home editor Mark Easton is here with the details. Mark.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, despite this country's wealth, a significant proportion of people still live in homes that are dangerous to their health. It's estimated that in England, illness caused by poor housing costs the NHS £1.4 billion a year. Now, there is a decent home standard set by government, but the latest English housing survey finds 3.5 million homes fail to reach the minimum requirement. And of those, 2.2 million have what's called a Category 1 hazard, meaning they present the highest risk of serious harm or even death. Damp and mould dangers are associated with allergies, respiratory disease and damage to the immune system. And damp and mould is found in almost 1 million homes in England. Now, little Awab was in social housing, where there has been some improvement in the last decade. In 2010, just over 7% of social rented properties had damp. Now it's 5%. But that is still 200,000 homes. Owner-occupied properties have also seen an improvement, but damp currently present in around 300,000 homes. And in the less regulated private rented sector, 1 in 10 homes still have damp problems, and that's more than 400,000 properties. Now, there have been calls for damp and mould to be treated like gas safety and Legionella, compelling landlords to sort it out or face prosecution. And the government's also looking to introduce a legally binding decent home standard in the private rented sector, matching rules already in place for social housing. But this is a scandal decades in the making, with millions paying to live in homes that are deficient, dangerous or deadly. Sophie.
Mark, thank you. Russia has launched one of its biggest barrages of missiles yet on Ukraine, knocking out power supplies in cities across the country. President Zelensky says at least 85 missiles have been fired and there could be more. At least 2 residential buildings were hit in the capital, Kyiv, killing 1 person. Half of the capital is now without power. Many other cities have lost electricity too. The Ukrainian government described the energy situation across the country as critical, with strikes also reported in Lviv, Kharkiv and Chernihiv. It comes after the Russian military was forced to withdraw from the city of Kherson. Well, our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, is in Odessa in the south of Ukraine, and missile attacks all over the country. Why this barrage now?
Yeah, including missile attacks here as well, Sophie. In the last few minutes while I've been waiting to talk to you, at least a dozen fire engines have come down this road behind me, and ambulances and police cars, because they're saying that there have been attacks by 1 Russian caliber cruise missile and 8 of the Shahid so-called kamikaze Iranian drones. So there's activity here as well. As for the timing, well, you said yourself that the Ukrainians are celebrating that victory in Kherson. The president, Mr. Zelensky, was there yesterday. Meanwhile, at the G20, the Russian foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, President Putin didn't go, has been very much having his feet held to the fire, particularly by Western countries, about what's been going on here. So they've been under pressure. The thing about a big attack like they've had today is it's not something you just do on the spur of the moment. They must have had the targets programmed already and have an idea of what to do when they wanted to unleash it. So this is perhaps the biggest one they've ever done like this. Certainly it's the first or the second. And so therefore I think that they must have decided that today was going to be the day. And of course, for the Ukrainians who are without power, It's putting a lot of pressure on them, and that is the intention in the Kremlin.
Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen in Odessa. Thank you. The Prime Minister says the UK's reputation took a bit of a knock because of Liz Truss's mini budget. Rishi Sunak says tax rises and spending cuts in Thursday's autumn statement are needed to fix a difficult situation, but it would be done in a fair way. Rishi Sunak was speaking to our political editor Chris Mason at the G20 summit in Indonesia.
Diplomacy comes in many styles. At a gala dinner here tonight, the leaders, including Rishi Sunak, were each given an outfit to wear by the Indonesian hosts of this summit. The Prime Minister on the world stage, facing scrutiny, attempting to patch up Britain's image. Prime Minister, in your judgment, how tarnished is the UK's reputation after what's happened this year?
Well, look, obviously our international reputation took a bit of a knock as a result of some of the things that happened more recently. But what I've seen here at the G20 summit in Indonesia is an enormous amount of goodwill for the UK to be an active and engaged member of the international community.
Responsibility.
To that end, Mr. Sunak confronted this man, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, earlier to his face. All the G20 members gathered together, and after the cameras left the room, the Prime Minister condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A war, Mr. Sunak points out, that's made his decisions at home in this week's autumn statement even harder. You are putting up taxes, you are cutting spending. They are choices. How can you be sure you're not going to make a bad situation worse?
Well, I think, taking a step back, the number one challenge we face is inflation. We're not alone in that. Actually, for example, Germany and Italy have inflation that is even higher than ours at the moment. And it's important that we get a grip of that. It's important that we limit the increase in mortgage rates that people are experiencing. And the best way to do that is to get a grip of our borrowing levels.
Even if that makes people poorer.
And that's in everyone's long-term interest that we make sure that that plan works. But what I can reassure people is the way we will go about that will have fairness and compassion at the heart of all the decisions.
I also wanted to ask the Prime Minister about his deputy, Dominic Raab. It's been suggested his manner as a minister in the past has left some people feeling demeaned, even seeking a route out of working with him. A spokesman for Mr. Raab said he holds everyone, and most of all himself, to high standards. Were there any concerns, even informal ones, raised with you about the conduct of Dominic Raab before you appointed him as your deputy?
Now, I've been very clear. I don't recognise the characterisation of Dominic's behaviour, and I also was not and am not aware of any formal complaints.
I asked about if there were any informal.
No, well, there's a formal complaints process, and that's the important thing that people should avail themselves of about
Let me be clear. Are you saying there was nobody or no document made any even informal reference to his conduct? It's separate from a formal complaint.
Yeah, but I think it is important that we do have a formal complaints process.
But did anyone raise anything informally?
I said I don't recognise the characterisation of Dominic's behaviour personally.
There's a pattern here, isn't there? 3 weeks in to your time as Prime Minister, 3 ministers, a Home Secretary who you appointed days after she resigned, a Cabinet Office Minister, Gavin Williamson, who was forced to resign, now questions about your deputy. They all have something in common, don't they? They all backed you for the leadership. That's the blunt truth here. You hired them because they supported you, rather than necessarily because of their merits.
No, I mean, you mentioned the Home Secretary. What have we just seen? We've actually just seen that the Home Secretary and I, working together, have concluded a new deal with France to help us tackle illegal migration.
Less than a month into the job, Rishi Sunak encounters the privileges, intensity, compromises and questions that come with the highest office. Chris Mason, BBC News, in Bali.
Wages are rising at their fastest rate in more than 20 years, but they still lag well behind the soaring cost of living. Average pay, not including any bonuses, rose by 5.7% in the year to September. But once inflation is taken into account, it meant that wages actually fell by 2.7%. People working in the private sector fared better, with average pay rises of 6.6% compared to just 2.2% in the public sector. Well, it comes at a time of very low unemployment and huge numbers of vacant jobs, meaning that employers are having to offer more money to get the staff that they need. And that is proving difficult for some companies, as our business editor Simon Jack reports.
Pay may be rising, but prices are rising faster. At this private care home in Gloucester, 70% of residents are funded by a cash-strapped local authority. Rising food and energy bills makes it difficult to increase staff wages, so some are looking elsewhere.
To be honest, I'm getting really fed up with reading resignation letters that say, I love my job, I don't want to go, I love looking after the residents, but I have to put my family and myself first. And you know, they're getting sort of offers of 20, 30% higher than we can possibly pay to go and work for places like Amazon and supermarkets. And what can you say to them, you know? What can you say other than fair enough?
With the number of vacancies still near record highs and unemployment near record lows, there remains a chronic shortage of workers.
The percentage of people who want a job and can't find one is incredibly low, and that's a good thing. But it's partly because the number of people able and willing to work has shrunk by hundreds of thousands. Some have left the country, some are in education, and an unprecedented number, particularly of the over 50s, have decided they are unwilling or not well enough to look for a job.
Mary put this together. People like David Dickerson, whose health forced him out of the workforce and made rejoining it seem daunting.
And this is the first time you've done a CV?
That's the first time I've done a CV in 20 years. For 37 years I drove trucks. I had a heart attack, I lost my licence, got over that, decided to start looking for work again, but kept getting knocked back and knocked back and knocked back all the time. And I gave up. I literally just said, sod it, I'm not going to do it anymore.
David is now retraining with the help of a local employment support project whose leader says employers need to do more to bring back older workers.
There's many people who want to work, a potential army for the country's workforce. But to enable them to get into work, they need support, guidance, access to training and reskilling, perhaps if they're moving into a new industry. And on the flip side, you need employers who are open to doing things a little bit differently.
Public sector wages have risen by just 2.2% over the last year, compared to 6.6% in the private sector, which unions are warning has to be addressed to avoid strikes, a mass exodus, or both.
It's driving experienced, teaching assistants, nurses, health workers, care workers to go and work in the private sector where they can get more money, and who can blame them? But this isn't good for public services. It means that we're hemorrhaging staff from some of our essential services.
The government will outline its tax and spending plans on Thursday. It's warned of eye-wateringly difficult decisions. Public sector pay may be one of the very hardest. Simon Jack, BBC News, Gloucester.
And if you want to find out more about Thursday's autumn statement and how it may affect you, you can go to the BBC News website at bbc.co.uk/news, where you'll find plenty of useful information in our Cost of Living Tackling It Together series. The time is coming up to 6:20, our top story this evening. A coroner rules that the death of 2-year-old Awab Ishaq was directly connected to the mould inside his family's rented flat in Rochdale.
And coming up, I'll be live here in Doha, where England have just arrived for the Qatar World Cup and Wales are on their way amid a controversial build-up.
At 6:30, we answer some of your questions about the extra polio vaccination now being offered to younger children in London. And The Bear is back on Friday. We hear how your fundraising has changed lives.
So the England team have just arrived in Qatar ahead of the World Cup, which kicks off on Sunday. The Wales team will arrive later tonight. The tournament has been controversial from the start. A lot of the focus has been on the way migrant workers brought in to build the venues and other infrastructure have been treated. Now a BBC investigation has uncovered evidence that workers have died in the last few months, despite assurances that safety standards had improved. But the government in Qatar has told the BBC that it's committed to ensuring the health and safety of workers employed on its projects. Our South Asia correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports from Nepal, where many of the migrant workers have come from.
An unexpected goodbye. Villagers in Gol Bazaar carry a heavy burden. Performing the last rites for Umesh Kumar Yadav. He was 32. In Nepali tradition, a son lights his father's funeral pyre. 13-month-old Shashank is carried by his grandfather. Umesh worked as a labourer in Qatar in the final weeks before the World Cup. He regularly shared TikTok videos of the dormitory where he lived and the construction sites where he worked. A day after this video was filmed, Umesh died. His cousin Lakshman has just returned to Nepal from Qatar, where he also worked. He rushed to the site as soon as he heard Umesh had died.
4 of us went to ask what happened. They told us Umesh was taking the scaffold lift up. When it touched something and broke, he fell down.
This was where it happened. The company said their site was safe and that Umesh's death was due to his own negligence and recklessness. Umesh's father sold some of his buffalo to pay for his son to go to Qatar. Here, life is tough. So too is death. A family now without a son, father and breadwinner.
My son is gone. We used the money he sent us to pay for our loans and for our children's education. Now we don't have any money. I'm not sure what we are going to do.
The southeast rural belt of Nepal is one of the poorest areas in one of the poorest countries. Opportunities scarce. Hundreds of thousands have left these districts for Qatar since it was awarded the World Cup. As part of our investigation, we've looked at a number of death certificates going back about 6 years of workers who've died in Qatar, not just from here in Nepal, but also India and Bangladesh. And on a number of them, we've seen a similar cause of death: multiple blunt injuries due to fall from height. We've spoken to some of the families who believe that these deaths are down to workplace safety not being adequate. Siddesh Mandal went to Qatar 4 years ago. He was building infrastructure as the country prepared for the tournament. Siddesh was due to visit his family here in Nepal on the 12th of October. 4 days earlier, they received a call telling them he died at work.
He was working 7 feet below ground when heavy debris fell on him and he was crushed. His friend, who was also in Qatar, told me. I wouldn't have known otherwise.
Krishna, have you received any compensation or the offer of any money from the company?
Nothing.
No. We contacted the company Siddesh worked for, but they didn't respond. So how do so many young men from South Asia end up working in Qatar? Well, often they're recruited by agents who offer them well-paid jobs in exchange for money to get them a visa to go there. The men are then passed from contract to contract, which means that their families often don't know which companies they're working for and who to go to for compensation when things go wrong. 1 million miles from here, the world's biggest football tournament will soon begin. Qatar's government maintains it's committed to the dignity and safety of workers on all of its projects. But some of the young men who left these districts say their experiences off the pitch tell a very different story. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Nepal.
Well, to the tournament now, and the England team flew into Qatar this afternoon on a plane called Rainbow. Wales land in a few hours' time. Our sports editor Dan Roan has the latest from Doha.
Young fans giving Wales the fondest of farewells in Cardiff today at a final training session before leaving for the World Cup. A journey this team has been waiting 64 years to make.
For the kids now to be able to have Wales, their country, being able to watch them and have the actual kind of poster up on the wall to mark out each game will be incredible, and I think it'll definitely inspire another generation.
Last night, England announced their shirt numbers with the help of a special guest at their training base, the President of the FA, the Prince of Wales.
Really here to just kind of point out that the rest of the country is behind you. We're all rooting for you. Enjoy it.
This evening, the squad arrived here in Doha on Virgin's Rainbow plane, displaying Oscar, its LGBT icon, in a show of support for inclusivity at a tournament they're among the favourites to win.
Yeah, we try not to think about it that far ahead, but of course there
that's the dream. That's what we're aiming to do. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a really tough tournament. Starting Monday is going to be a really tough game, and we know that, so we have to prepare for that. But yeah, I'm just really excited to get going.
This, meanwhile, is where England will be based as they bid for World Cup glory. This luxury seaside resort in Al Wakra on the outskirts of Doha, the team hotel. But they've already made a big impression here. Captain Harry Kane among the top players whose images adorn some of the city's many skyscrapers. Both British teams get their World Cup campaigns underway on Monday, but England will be the first to kick off here at the Khalifa International Stadium against Iran. This, the only one of the 8 venues that's not new. This first ever World Cup in the Middle East, costing the hosts an estimated £180 billion. This an expression of their wealth and their ambition. After a build-up mired in controversy, FIFA has launched a star-studded pre-tournament video with a message of unity. Today its president even telling the G20 summit in Bali that the event could help peace in Ukraine.
My plea to all of you is to think on a temporary ceasefire for 1 month for the duration of the World Cup, or at least the implementation of some humanitarian corridors. In a country where being gay is illegal, the US squad have shown their support for the LGBT community here with a rainbow-themed team logo at their base. And tonight the squad invited migrant workers to their training session in another gesture that shows how determined some sides are to promote human rights as well as the action. Well, FIFA has urged all 32 competing teams here to now focus on the football, and traditionally, once the squads arrive and the action begins, the narrative shifts towards events on the pitch. But I think such has been the concern during the build-up towards the treatment of migrant workers, as you just saw, but also the discriminatory laws here in Qatar. That tradition is going to be tested here like never before. The organisers point to labour reforms. They insist that all will be welcome. But there's no doubt the eyes of the world are on Qatar, and there is a huge amount at stake for the hosts. Dan Roan, thank you. The family of a British Egyptian activist being held in a prison near Cairo say he has broken his hunger strike. Alaa Abdel Fattah started his protest 7 months ago. He's currently serving a 5-year sentence accused of spreading false news after sharing a Facebook post about torture in Egypt. The former tennis world men's #1, Novak Djokovic, will be allowed to play in the Australian Open in January, according to reports in the Australian media. He was deported from Australia in the lead-up to this year's tournament in a row over his COVID vaccination status. Now, a lot of dogs are terrified of fireworks, and Rosie, the Border Collie, is no exception. She was out on a walk with her owner last week when a large bang spooked her so much that she disappeared. She's a clever dog, though. While her owner was looking for her, Rosie handed herself in to the local police station. Phil Mackey was on her tail.
Have you heard the one about the dog who walked into a police station? She was hardly the usual suspect. This was when Rosie, the Border Collie, handed herself in after a particularly rough day. Luckily, she was already tagged, which meant there was no need for officers to go out on paw patrol. Today, the only hazard on her morning walk with owner Steve Harper was the rain, but on November the 4th, it was fireworks. They'd come to her favourite park. There were a series of loud bangs, and Rosie ran off. After a frantic search, Steve's wife rang to say Rosie had handed herself in at the nearby police station.
She was calm once she's gone in. Once she wasn't inside, she wasn't frightened of the bangs. So she just sat down calmly. I've seen that on the CCTV clip.
Just sat there waiting?
That's right, sat down waiting.
And why did she go to the police station, I wonder?
Well, probably because it was somewhere safe, really.
It was Fiona Lacey who collared Rosie that night, happily reunited today.
Hey, Rosie. You get all kinds wandering into a police station.
Yes.
Do you often get a dog wandering?
No, it's the first time that I've seen a dog wandering that's lost.
And she's become very famous. I mean, the whole thing's gone crazy, hasn't it?
It has, and what a lovely dog she is as well.
An affectionate Rosie is now completely over her bonfire night ordeal. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Loughborough.
Poor Rosie. Helen Willits is here with the latest weather. My dog was absolutely terrified of the fireworks.
I was very lucky, I think. It was our first year with fireworks, so I played some noises to her before. It seemed to calm her down. Not sure she would have handed herself into the local police. Anyway, we've had some beautiful Weather Watcher pictures this evening showing the sunset, the rainbows, but what a soggy dog walking day it has been, hasn't it? We've had a thorough soaking if you've been out and about. You can see the rainfall in the last few hours. It's still across Scotland at the moment, so some tricky travel conditions, and heavy showers are sweeping in behind. So some of the wettest places have had 50 to 75 millimetres of rain in the past 12 to 18 hours. No wonder we've got flood warnings out in parts of southeast England and across Scotland. And the rain, the weather fronts, the low pressure's relentless. This shows the rainfall accumulating throughout the rest of the week, and some parts of Highland Scotland, as you can see, may get in excess of 80 millimetres of rain. Through this evening and overnight, though, that rain does pull away. It becomes stuck, if you like, across the Northern Isles, particularly Shetland. Heavy showers rattling behind, some rumbles of thunder as well, not great for dogs either. And in between, it turns a little cooler. Temperatures low enough for a touch of grass frost in the glens of Scotland, possibly a little bit of mistiness in Northern Ireland. But it does look like a drier day for the bulk of the UK. Yes, for Shetland, it'll be blowing a gale, if not a severe gale force wind here, with rain for the next 48 hours or so. And heavy rain comes back into the southwest later, and it's a little cooler. But for many, it's quieter, it's drier. But come tomorrow evening, as this next area of low pressure rolls in, again, another 30 or 40 millimetres of rain possible, gales through the Channel, and as well as that, we've got those gales or severe gale force winds continuing across Shetland too. So that low pressure makes its way further northwards on Thursday. So an issue with rain in the south again tomorrow evening and overnight, and across the north as we go into Thursday. It's relentless, this rain, Sophie.
Helen, thank you very much. And that is the BBC News at 6. That's it from us. The news, though, continues here on BBC One, because it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.